Chapter 3 of a Narrative of the Life of Mrs. Mary Jemison. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A Narrative in the Life of Mrs. Mary Jemison by James E. Seaver. Chapter 3. The night was spent in gloomy forebodings. What the result of our captivity would be, it was out of our power to determine or even imagine. At times we could almost realize the approach of our masters to butcher and scalp us. Again, we could nearly see the pile of wood kindled on which we were to be roasted. And then we would imagine ourselves at liberty, alone and defenceless in the forest, surrounded by wild beasts that were ready to devour us. The anxiety of our minds drove sleep from our eyelids, and it was with a dreadful hope and painful impatience that we waited for the morning to determine our fate. The morning at length arrived, and our masters came early to let us out of the house, and gave the young man and the boy to the French, who immediately took them away. Their fate I never learned, as I have not seen nor heard of them since. I was now left alone in the fort, deprived of my former companions, and of everything that was near and dear to me but life. But it was not long before I was in some measure relieved by the appearance of two pleasant-looking squaws of the Seneca tribe, who came and examined me attentively for a short time, and then went out. After a few minutes' absence they returned with my former masters, who gave me to them to dispose of as they pleased. The Indians by whom I was taken were a party of the Shawnees, if I remember right, that lived, when at home, a long distance down the Ohio. My former Indian masters and the two squaws were soon ready to leave the fort, and accordingly embarked, the Indians in a large canoe, and the two squaws and myself in a small one, and went down the Ohio. When we set off, an Indian in the forward canoe took the scalps of my former friends, strung them on a pole that he placed upon his shoulder, and in that manner carried them, standing in the stern of the canoe, directly before us as we sailed down the river to the town where the two squaws resided. On our way we passed a Shawnee town, where I saw a number of heads, arms, legs, and other fragments of the bodies of some white people who had just been burnt. The parts that remained were hanging on a pole, which was supported at each end by a crotch stuck in the ground, and were roasted or burnt, black as a coal. The fire was yet burning, and the whole appearances afforded a spectacle so shocking that, even to this day, my blood almost curdles in my veins when I think of them. At night we arrived at a small Seneca Indian town, at the mouth of a small river that is called by the Indians, in the Seneca language, Shinanji. Footnote. That town, according to the geographical description given by Mrs. Jemison, must have stood at the mouth of Indian Cross Creek, which is about 76 miles by water below Pittsburgh, or at the mouth of Indian Short Creek, 87 miles below Pittsburgh, where the town of Warren now stands. But at which of those places I am unable to determine. Author. End of footnote. Where the two squaws to whom I belonged resided. There we landed, and the Indians went on, which was the last I ever saw of them. Having made fast to the shore, the squaws left me in the canoe while they went to their wigwam, or house, in the town, and returned with a suit of Indian clothing, all new, very clean and nice. My clothes, though whole and good when I was taken, were now torn in pieces, so that I was almost naked. They first undressed me, and threw my rags into the river, then washed me clean, and dressed me in the new suit they had just brought, in complete Indian style, and then led me home, and seated me in the centre of their wigwam. I had been in that situation but a few minutes before all the squaws in the town came in to see me. I was soon surrounded by them, and they immediately set up a most dismal howling, crying bitterly, and wringing their hands in the agonies of grief for a deceased relative. Their tears flowed freely, and they exhibited all the signs of real mourning. At the commencement of this scene, one of their number began, in a voice somewhat between speaking and singing, to recite some words in the following purport, and continued the recitation till the ceremony was ended. the company at the same time varying the appearance of their countenances, gestures, and tone of voice, so as to correspond with the sentiments expressed by their leader. "Oh, our brother! Alas, he is dead! He has gone! He will never return! Friendless he died on the field of the slain, where his bones are yet lying unburied. Oh, who will not mourn his sad fate? No tears dropped around him. Oh, no! No tears of his sisters were there. He fell in his prime, when his arm was most needed to keep us from danger. Alas, he has gone, and left us in sorrow his loss to bewail. Oh, where is his spirit? His spirit went naked and hungry it wanders, and thirsty and wounded it groans to return. Oh, helpless and wretched, our brother has gone! No blanket nor food to nourish and warm him, no candles to light him, nor weapons of war. Oh, none of those comforts had he, but well we remember his deeds. The deer he could take on the chase, the panther shrunk back at the sight of his strength. His enemies fell at his feet. He was brave and courageous in war. As the fawn was harmless, his friendship was ardent. His temper was gentle, his pity was great. Oh, our friend, our companion is dead. Our brother, your brother, alas, he is gone. But why do we grieve for his loss? In the strength of a warrior, undaunted, he left us, to fight by the side of the chiefs. His war whoop was shrill. His rifle well aimed laid his enemies low. His tomahawk drank of their blood, and his knife flayed their scalps while yet covered with gore. And why do we mourn? Though he fell on the field of the slain, with glory he fell, and his spirit went up to the land of his fathers in war. Then why do we mourn? With transports of joy they received him, and fed him, and clothed him, and welcomed him there. O friends, he is happy. Then dry up your tears. His spirit has seen our distress, and sent us a helper whom with pleasure we greet. Dickewamis has come. Let us receive her with joy. She is handsome and pleasant. Oh, she is our sister, and gladly we welcome her here. In the place of our brother she stands in the tribe. With care we will guard her from trouble, and may she be happy till her spirit shall leave us." In the course of that ceremony, from mourning they became serene. Joy sparkled in their countenances, and they seemed to rejoice over me as over a long-lost child. I was made welcome amongst them as a sister to the two squaws before mentioned, and was called Dickewamis, which being interpreted signifies a pretty girl, a handsome girl, or a pleasant good thing. That is the name by which I have ever since been called by the Indians. I afterwards learned that the ceremony I at the time passed through was that of adoption. The two squaws had lost a brother in Washington's war some time in the year before, and in consequence of his death went up to Fort Pitt on the day on which I arrived there, in order to receive a prisoner or an enemy's scalp to supply their loss. It is a custom of the Indians, when one of their number is slain or taken prisoner in battle, to give to the nearest relative to the dead or absent a prisoner, if they have chanced to take one, and if not, to give him the scalp of an enemy. On the return of the Indians from conquest, which is always announced by peculiar shoutings, demonstrations of joy, and the exhibition of some trophy of victory, the mourners come forward and make their claims. If they receive a prisoner, it is at their option either to satiate their vengeance by taking his life in the most cruel manner they can conceive of, or to receive and adopt him into the family, in the place of him whom they have lost. All the prisoners that are taken in battle and carried to the encampment or town by the Indians are given to the bereaved families, till their number is made good. And, unless the mourners have just received the news of their bereavement, and are under the operation of a paroxysm of grief, anger, and revenge, or unless the prisoner is very old, sickly, or homely, they generally save him and treat him kindly. But if their mental wound is fresh, their loss so great that they deem it irreparable, or if their prisoner or prisoners do not meet their approbation, no torture, let it be ever so cruel, seems sufficient to make them satisfaction. It is family and not national sacrifices among the Indians. that has given them an indelible stamp as barbarians, and identified their character with the idea which is generally formed of unfeeling ferocity and the most abandoned cruelty. It was my happy lot to be accepted for adoption, and at the time of the ceremony I was received by the two squaws to supply the place of their brother in the family, and I was ever considered and treated by them as a real sister, the same as though I had been born of their mother. During my adoption I sat motionless, nearly terrified to death at the appearance and actions of the company, expecting every moment to feel their vengeance and suffer death on the spot. I was, however, happily disappointed when at the close of the ceremony the company retired, and my sisters went about employing every means for my consolation and comfort. Being now settled and provided with a home, I was employed in nursing the children and doing light work about the house. Occasionally I was sent out with the Indian hunters, when they went but a short distance, to help them carry their game. My situation was easy. I had no particular hardships to endure, but still the recollection of my parents, my brothers and sisters, my home, and my own captivity destroyed my happiness and made me constantly solitary, lonesome, and gloomy. My sisters would not allow me to speak English in their hearing; but, remembering the charge that my dear mother gave me at the time I left her, whenever I chanced to be alone I made a business of repeating my prayer, catechism, or something I had learned, in order that I might not forget my own language. By practising in that way I retained it till I came to Genesee Flats, where I soon became acquainted with English people with whom I have been almost daily in the habit of conversing. My sisters were diligent in teaching me their language, and to their great satisfaction I soon learned so that I could understand it readily and speak it fluently. I was very fortunate in falling into their hands, for they were kind, good-natured women, peaceable and mild in their dispositions, temperate and decent in their habits, and very tender and gentle towards me. I have great reason to respect them, though they have been dead a great number of years. The town where they lived was pleasantly situated on the Ohio, at the mouth of the Shenanjee. The land produced good corn, the woods furnished plenty of game, and the waters abounded with fish. Another river emptied itself into the Ohio, directly opposite the mouth of the Shenanjee. We spent the summer at that place, where we planted, hoed, and harvested a large crop of corn, of an excellent quality. About the time of the corn harvest, Fort Pitt was taken from the French by the English. [Footnote: The above statement is apparently an error, and is to be attributed solely to the treachery of the old lady's memory, though she is confident that that event took place at the time above mentioned. It is certain that Fort Pitt was not evacuated by the French and given up to the English till some time in November, 1758. It is possible, however, that an armistice was agreed upon, and that for a time, between the spring of 1755 and 1758, both nations visited that post without fear of molestation. As the succeeding part of the narrative corresponds with the true historical chain of events, the public will overlook this circumstance, which appears unsupported by history. Author. End of footnote. The corn being harvested, the Indians took it on horses and in canoes, and proceeded down the Ohio, occasionally stopping to hunt a few days, till we arrived at the mouth of Sciota River, where they established their winter quarters, and continued hunting till the ensuing spring, in the adjacent wilderness. While at that place, I went with the other children to assist the hunters to bring in their game. The forests on the Sciota were well stocked with elk, deer, and other large animals, and the marshes contained large numbers of beaver, muskrat, etc., which made excellent hunting for the Indians, who depended for their meat upon their success in taking elk and deer, and for ammunition and clothing upon the beaver, muskrat, and other furs they could take in addition to their peltry. The season for hunting being past, we all returned in the spring to the mouth of the river Shenanjee, to the houses and fields we had left in the fall before. There we again planted our corn, squashes, and beans on the fields that we occupied the preceding summer. About planting time our Indians all went up to Fort Pitt to make peace with the British, and took me with them. [Footnote: History is silent as to any treaty having been made between the English and French and Indians at that time. though it is possible that a truce was agreed upon, and that the parties met for the purpose of concluding a treaty of peace. We landed on the opposite side of the river from the fort, and encamped for the night. Early the next morning the Indians took me over to the fort to see the white people that were there. It was then that my heart bounded to be liberated from the Indians, and to be restored to my friends and my country. The white people were surprised to see me with the Indians, enduring the hardships of a savage life, at so early an age, and with so delicate a constitution as I appeared to possess. They asked me my name, where and when I was taken, and appeared very much interested on my behalf. They were continuing their inquiries when my sisters became alarmed, believing that I should be taken from them, hurried me into their canoe and recrossed the river, took their bread out of the fire, and fled with me, without stopping, till they arrived at the river Shenanjee. So great was their fear of losing me, or of my being given up in the treaty, that they never once stopped rowing till they got home. Shortly after we left the shore opposite the fort, as I was informed by one of my Indian brothers, the white people came over to take me back, but after considerable inquiry, and having made diligent search to find where I was hid, they returned with heavy hearts. Although I had been with the Indians something over a year, and had become considerably habituated to their mode of living, and attached to my sisters, the sight of white people who could speak English inspired me with an unspeakable anxiety to go home with them, and share in the blessings of civilization. My sudden departure and escape from them seemed like a second captivity, and for a long time I brooded the thoughts of my miserable situation with almost as much sorrow and dejection as I had done those of my first sufferings. Time, the destroyer of every affection, wore away my unpleasant feelings, and I became as contented as before. We tended our cornfields through the summer, and after we had harvested the crop we again went down the river to the hunting ground on the Sciota, where we spent the winter as we had done the winter before. Early in the spring we sailed up the Ohio River to a place that the Indians call Wiishtu. [Footnote: Wiishtu, I suppose, was situated near the mouth of Indian Guyandat, 327 miles below Pittsburgh and 73 above Big Sciota, or at the mouth of Swan Creek, 307 miles below Pittsburgh.] where one river emptied into the Ohio on one side and another on the other. At that place the Indians built a town, and we planted corn. We lived 3 summers at Wiishtu, and spent each winter on the Sciota. The first summer of our living at Wiishtu, a party of Delaware Indians came up the river, took up their residence, and lived in common with us. They brought 5 white prisoners with them, who by their conversation made my situation much more agreeable, as they could all speak English. I have forgotten the names of all of them except one, which was Priscilla Ramsay. She was a very handsome, good-natured girl, and was married soon after she came to Wiishtu to Captain Little Billy's uncle, who went with her on a visit to her friends in the States. Having tarried with them as long as she wished to, she returned with her husband to Caniatua, where he died. She, after his death, married a white man by the name of Nettles, and now lives with him, if she is living, on Grand River, Upper Canada. Not long after the Delawares came to live with us at Wiishtu, my sisters told me that I must go and live with one of them, whose name was Sheninjee. Not daring to cross them, or disobey their commands, with a great degree of reluctance I went, and Sheninjee and I were married according to Indian custom. Sheninjee was a noble man, large in stature, elegant in his appearance, generous in his conduct, courageous in war, a friend to peace, and a great lover of justice. He supported a large degree of dignity far above his rank, and merited and received the confidence and friendship of all the tribes with whom he was acquainted. Yet Sheninjee was an Indian. The idea of spending my days with him at first seemed perfectly irreconcilable to my feelings, but his good nature, generosity, tenderness, and friendship towards me soon gained my affection, and, strange as it may seem, I loved him. To me he was ever kind in sickness, and always treated me with gentleness. In fact, he was an agreeable husband, and a comfortable companion. We lived happily together till the time of our final separation, which happened 2 or 3 years after our marriage, as I shall presently relate. In the second summer of my living at Wiishto, I had a child, at the time that the kernels of corn first appeared on the cob. When I was taken sick, Sheninjee was absent, and I was sent to a small shed, on the bank of the river, which was made of boughs, where I was obliged to stay till my husband returned. My 2 sisters, who were my only companions, attended me, and on the second day of my confinement my child was born, but it lived only 2 days. It was a girl, and notwithstanding the shortness of the time that I possessed it, it was a great grief to me to lose it. After the birth of my child I was very sick, but was not allowed to go into the house for 2 weeks, when, to my great joy, Sheninjee returned, and I was taken in and as comfortably provided for as our situation would admit of. My disease continued to increase for a number of days, and I became so far reduced that my recovery was despaired of by my friends, and I concluded that my troubles would soon be finished. At length, however, my complaint took a favourable turn, and by the time that the corn was ripe I was able to get about. I continued to gain my health, and in the fall I was able to go to our winter quarters, on the Sciota, with the Indians. From that time nothing remarkable occurred to me until the 4th winter of my captivity, when I had a son born, while I was at Sciota. I had a quick recovery, and my child was healthy. To commemorate the name of my much lamented father, I called my son Thomas Jemison. End of Chapter 3. Read by Mary Ann Spiegel, on August 15th, 2009.